In a small village nestled between the hills, there lived a family torn apart by anger, bitterness, and violence. This was the home of Uchenna, a boy of 10 years old, and his younger sister Ada, who was only 7. The two children were inseparable, or so it seemed to the villagers who often saw them playing under the tall iroko tree. However, beneath the surface of their home, a darkness brewed, a storm of violence and fear that no one could see but the children themselves. Uchenna's parents, Chika and Nana, once shared love, but that love had withered over the years. What once was a happy home became a battlefield. Arguments would erupt like thunder, shaking the walls of their modest house. Chika, Uchenna's mother, would shout, and Nana, his father, would respond with fists. It was a routine that the children had grown used to, even though their hearts trembled each time the shouting began. One day, as the sun set behind the hills, Uchenna stood in the corner of the kitchen, peering through the doorway into the living room. His mother's voice echoed through the walls, "Why can't you ever listen, Nana? You're always at the palm wine hut when you should be home." Her voice cracked with frustration. Nana, his father, barked back, his voice rough like gravel, "You think I enjoy this life? You think I want to be here, with you, nagging me all the time?" Then, it happened again, like it always did. Nana's hand, quick as lightning, struck Chika across the face, and she fell to the floor, crying. Uchenna, trembling, closed his eyes. He had seen this scene too many times. Ada, holding her doll, stood by the door, her innocent eyes wide with fear. Uchenna, Ada whispered, her voice quivering. "Why does Daddy hit Mommy?" Uchenna didn't have an answer. All he knew was that this was the way things were. But each time his father raised his hand, a part of Uchenna believed that this was how problems were solved, through violence. It was a scorching afternoon when the tragedy happened. Uchenna and Ada had just returned from school, tired and hungry. Chika had left some yam porridge on the stove for them, but there wasn't enough for both. Uchenna served himself a large portion, leaving only a small bit for Ada. "Uchenna, that's too much. You're taking all the food," Ada complained, her small voice filled with frustration. "Go away, Ada. This is my food." "You're always complaining, just like Mommy," Uchenna snapped back. "I'm hungry too." "You're not being fair," Ada said, her eyes filling with tears. Suddenly, Uchenna's mind flashed back to the many times he had seen his father deal with conflict. His father never listened to complaints, he silenced them. And at that moment, Uchenna's anger flared. "Stop whining. I'll hit you like Daddy hits Mommy." Uchenna shouted, his voice echoing through the small house. Without thinking, Uchenna swung his hand at Ada, just like his father did to his mother. The blow struck Ada hard across the face. She stumbled backward, her small frame unable to withstand the force. She fell, her head hitting the edge of the wooden table. Time seemed to stop. Uchenna's heart raced as he watched Ada lay still on the floor. Her doll rolled from her hand, lifeless as she was. "Ada?" Uchenna whispered, dropping to his knees beside her. "Ada, wake up." He shook her, but her body didn't respond. Panic set in as Uchenna screamed her name, but it was too late. His sister, his best friend, was gone. The house fell silent, except for the sound of Uchenna's sobs. He ran outside, screaming for help. Villagers rushed into the house, their faces filled with shock and horror. Chika, who had been at the market, returned to find her daughter lifeless and her son crying beside her. "What happened, Uchenna?" she screamed, her voice breaking. "What have you done?" Uchenna couldn't find the words. All he could say was, "I didn't mean to. I didn't mean to hit her like Daddy hits you." The villagers looked at each other, their faces grim. They had heard the stories, the arguments, the fights, but none of them had imagined it would come to this. Uchenna, a boy of only 10, had learned violence from the only example he had, his father. And now, it had cost him his sister's life. The consequences of violence. News of Ada's death spread quickly through the village. The elders gathered, discussing what should be done. Nana and Chica, once just a couple with problems, became the center of shame and sorrow. They had planted seeds of violence in their home, and now their son had reaped a tragic harvest. Uchenna, consumed with guilt and confusion, stopped speaking. He would sit under the irako tree where he and Ada used to play, staring into the distance, lost in a world of regret. The weight of his actions was too much for his young heart to bear. Chica, filled with grief, blamed herself for staying with Nana all those years, allowing her children to witness such horror. Nana, too, was broken, realizing too late that his behavior had not only destroyed his wife but had also led to the death of his daughter. One day, the village elder, a wise man named Okonkwo, called Uchenna's parents to the village square. The entire community had gathered, their faces filled with sorrow. "Evil begets evil," Okonkwo said, his voice deep and steady. "What we sow in our homes, our children will harvest. Uchenna is not to be blamed alone. His actions are a reflection of what he saw. We must all learn from this tragedy." He turned to Nana and Chica, his eyes piercing with wisdom. "You, Nana, have sown the seed of violence. And you, Chica, allowed it to grow. Now, you have both lost what was most precious to you. Let this be a lesson to all of us. Our children watch us, and they learn from us. We must be the example they need, or we will lose them." The villagers nodded in agreement, their hearts heavy with the weight of the lesson learned that day. In the months that followed, the village became quieter, more reflective. The sound of laughter from children playing under the irako tree was no longer heard. Uchenna, once full of life, had become a shadow of his former self, haunted by the memory of what he had done. His parents, now separated, carried the burden of their broken family, forever marked by the tragedy they had unknowingly set into motion. And so, the story of Uchenna and Ada became a cautionary tale passed down through generations, a reminder that the shadows we leave behind can destroy the innocent. It taught the village.
The days became a blur of whispers and glances from the villagers. Every face he saw was a reminder of what he had done, and every moment alone was filled with the ghostly echoes of his sister's laughter, the sound that had vanished forever. His mother, Chica, stayed away from him, consumed by her own grief. She could not bear to look at Uchenna, the child who had taken away her daughter. Yet, deep down, she knew it wasn't Uchenna's fault. It was her own failure, her inability to protect her children from the violence that had seeped into their lives like poison. Nana, his father, was no longer welcome in the village. He had been cast out by the elders, a man of shame and disgrace. He wandered the forests nearby, lost in his own guilt, but too proud to admit that his fists had destroyed his family. Uchenna's silent days. Uchenna, who had once been the brightest boy in his class, stopped going to school. His mind was filled with questions, but none of them had answers. He wondered if Ada could see him from wherever she was. Did she forgive him? Could she still hear him? One afternoon, Uchenna sat under the shade of the irako tree, staring at the spot where Ada's doll had fallen that fateful day. His hand absent-mindedly traced the shape of the dirt beneath him. The village children no longer invited him to play. Their parents had warned them to stay away from Uchenna, fearful that the violence that lived in his home might somehow spread. Okonkwo, the wise elder, often visited him under the tree. He would sit in silence beside the boy, offering his presence but not forcing him to speak. He understood that Uchenna needed time to make sense of a world that had been turned upside down. "Do you think she hates me?" Uchenna asked one day, his voice barely a whisper. Okonkwo turned to him, his old eyes filled with understanding. "No, Uchenna. Ada loved you, just as you loved her. What happened was not born of hate, but from the darkness that was shown to you. It was a mistake, but not one of your making alone." Uchenna looked up, his face pale. "But I hurt her. I hurt her like Daddy hurt Mommy. I didn't want to, but I did. Okonkwo placed a hand on Uchenna's shoulder, his grip firm but gentle. Violence is a curse, my son, passed from one hand to another. Your father gave you a burden he carried, and without knowing, you passed it to your sister. It is up to you now to break that chain. Uchenna didn't understand. How could he break something that had already destroyed his world? But Okonkwo's words lingered in his heart, like seeds waiting to grow. The spirit of the ancestors. One night, as Uchenna lay in bed, unable to sleep, he heard a soft voice calling his name. He sat up, his eyes wide with fear. The voice seemed to drift through the walls, gentle yet insistent. Uchenna. He followed the sound outside, into the night. The moon hung low in the sky, casting a pale glow over the village. As Uchenna stepped toward the irako tree, he saw something he had never seen before. There, beneath the tree, stood a woman clothed in light. Her eyes were kind but sad, and her face seemed familiar, yet he did not know why. "Who are you?" Uchenna asked, his voice trembling. The woman smiled softly. "I am the spirit of your ancestors, Uchenna. I have come to tell you that it is not too late." "Too late for what?" Uchenna asked, his heart pounding. "Too late to heal. The pain that has consumed your family has been passed down for many generations, but it does not have to continue. The way your father hurt your mother, and the way you hurt your sister, it is a cycle. But you can stop it. You have the power to break the chain." Uchenna shook his head. "But I killed Ada. How can I fix that? How can I ever make it right?" The woman knelt before him, her eyes filled with warmth. "You cannot change what has happened, Uchenna. But you can change what happens next. You can learn. You can grow. You can choose love over anger, peace over violence. That is how you will honor Ada." Tears filled Uchenna's eyes as the woman's form began to fade. "How do I do that?" he cried out. "How do I make things right?" "Start by forgiving yourself," the woman's voice echoed as she disappeared into the night. A journey of healing. From that night on, Uchenna began a slow journey of healing. He knew he could never bring Ada back, but he also knew that his life was not over. He visited Okonkwo every day, learning from the elder about the ways of peace and wisdom. Okonkwo taught him that anger was a fire that, if unchecked, would burn everything in its path. But peace, like water, could douse the flames. Uchenna's mother, Chika, too, began her own path to healing. She sought the help of the village women, who supported her in leaving
the pain of her marriage behind. Together, they worked in the fields, sang songs of old, and reminded Chika that there was still beauty in the world, even in the midst of sorrow. As for Nana, his journey was different. Cast out from the village, he wandered the forests, lost in guilt and regret. But one day, a traveling healer found him by the river, broken and alone. The healer offered him medicine for his body, but also for his spirit. Slowly, Nana began to understand the destruction his anger had caused, not just to his family but to himself. He would never return to the village, but he hoped that one day, Uchenna might find it in his heart to forgive him. The lessons of the land. As the years passed, Uchenna grew into a young man. He had learned to control the anger that once consumed him, replacing it with patience and understanding. He became known in the village for his wisdom, despite his young age, and children would often come to him when they had disputes, knowing he would help them find peaceful solutions. One day, as Uchenna stood beneath the irako tree, a group of children came running toward him, laughing and playing. They reminded him of Ada, innocent, full of life, untouched by the shadows that had once darkened his own childhood. "Uchenna," one of the children called, "will you play with us?" Uchenna smiled, his heart light for the first time in many years. Of course, he said. And as he joined the children in their game, he felt Ada's spirit watching over him, her laughter carried on the wind, no longer a painful memory but a source of strength. Moral of the story, extended. The story of Uchenna teaches us that the wounds inflicted by violence can ripple through generations, but the cycle can be broken. By learning from our mistakes, seeking forgiveness, and choosing love over anger, we can heal the wounds of the past and create a better future for ourselves and those we love. It reminds us that we must be mindful of the lessons we teach our children, for they are the carriers of our legacy, whether of peace or of pain.